He thought his 60-year-old maid was stealing from him, until one freezing Montana night, he followed her. What he found in the dark didn't just break his heart. It shattered everything he believed about loyalty, love, and the price of wealth. Before we begin, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from? United States, Canada, Malaysia, UK, Australia, Jamaica. The wind clawed across Bridger Ridge like it had a grudge against the world. Inside the glass-walled mansion, every surface gleamed, every thermostat hummed at a perfect 70 degrees. To anyone else, it was paradise. To Grayson Lyle, it was a spreadsheet with furniture. He sat at the kitchen island, laptop open, numbers dancing across the screen, ranch acquisitions, quarterly growth, land appraisals. But his focus kept slipping toward the corner where Maeve Callahan was quietly boxing leftovers. Maeve had worked for him 24 years. 60 years old, silver hair pulled tight, shoulders straight like someone who still made hospital corners on her bed. Grayson liked her because she didn't talk much. She worked, nodded, disappeared. Reliable. Predictable. Until 3 weeks ago. Because 3 weeks ago, he started noticing something strange. Every Thursday night, after tidying the kitchen, Maeve would take 2 large boxes, his boxes, with the ranch logo, and leave them in her old Subaru. At first, he figured she was taking out trash. But the next morning, the boxes never came back. He checked inventory. The pantry was stocked. The fridge accounted for. Nothing missing except small things, batches of bread, sealed jars, a few bags of flour. Probably just waste reduction, his accountant said when he mentioned it. But the numbers didn't add up. And Grayson Lyle hated when numbers didn't add up. That night, as snow began to fall, he watched Maeve load the boxes again. Through the wide kitchen window, he could see her breath hanging in the cold like fog. She moved slowly, carefully, as if every jar mattered. Then she looked up, just for a moment, and Grayson swore she looked guilty. Wait, it gets crazier. He couldn't shake the thought. Why would a woman who made $60,000 a year risk everything stealing from a man worth billions? Was she selling his food? Feeding someone else? He told himself he didn't care, but he did. By 9:47 p.m., curiosity won. He threw on his parka, grabbed his keys, and followed her taillights down the mountain. The highway was a blur of ice and headlights. Maeve's Subaru, small and rusted, clung to the road while his black Escalade glided behind at a distance. The snow thickened. He should have turned back. But he couldn't. Every mile, the questions grew louder. Who was she feeding? Why the secrecy? 15 miles out, Maeve turned off onto a dirt road, Valley Road, a place he hadn't thought about in years. That detail becomes important later. The town below was one of his first acquisitions. Small ranch houses turned into high-end vacation rentals. Locals used to live there before property taxes tripled. He hadn't been there since the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Maeve parked beside an old stone church. No lights except a faint glow leaking through basement windows. Grayson killed his engine and stepped out. The cold bit hard. He watched her carry the boxes inside. He waited. 1 minute. 5. 10. Then he followed. Now, pause for a second. Imagine the richest man in the county sneaking through snowdrifts behind a 60-year-old maid. He crept down the side steps toward the basement door. Voices echoed faintly through the concrete. He eased the door open a crack, and froze. Inside, about 20 people sat at folding tables, steam rising from paper bowls. Men with cracked hands, women with lined faces, kids bundled in coats too big for them. Maeve was behind a metal counter, ladling soup, smiling. Really smiling, not the polite curve she wore at his mansion. "Miss Maeve, you got more bread?" a little boy asked. She laughed softly. "Plenty, baby. Enough for everyone tonight." Grayson's stomach dropped. She wasn't stealing. She was feeding them. But here's the part nobody talks about. He recognized some of those faces. Ranch hands from properties he'd bought out. A couple from Livingston whose land had gone under after one of his developments rerouted their water supply. His breath caught. He watched Maeve move through the room like a conductor, greeting each person by name, tucking scarves around shoulders, handing out warm food like blessings. A man at the table raised his mug. To Miss Maeve, the angel in boots. The room erupted in cheers and laughter. Grayson stepped back, heart hammering. He stumbled into the snow, leaning against his car. For once, there was no formula for this. No chart. No equation. Just a quiet truth pounding through the cold. She was using his food to feed the people he'd ruined. He sat in his SUV for nearly an hour, engine off, lights out, snow piling on the windshield. At 11:15, Maeve emerged, tired but content, carrying empty boxes. She locked the door, looked up at the sky, and whispered something he couldn't hear. Then she got in her car and drove away. Grayson didn't follow this time. He just sat there until his breath fogged the glass and the engine was buried in white. By the end of this night, he thought he understood what he'd seen, but he didn't. Not yet. Because this was only the beginning, and what happened next would turn his suspicion into something far more dangerous. Conviction. I poured my heart into this story because I believe real emotions still matter. My girlfriend laughed and said I'd never even reach 1,000 subscribers. She might be right. Unless someone like you proves her wrong. Please hit subscribe, not for me alone, but for the stories that deserve to be heard. The next morning, the world looked clean, like the snow had erased every sin overnight. But Grayson Lyle knew better. No amount of white could cover what he'd seen. He didn't sleep. He sat in his glass office above Bozeman, staring at spreadsheets that suddenly looked like crime scenes. His assistant, Melinda, noticed the dark circles under his eyes. "Late night?" she asked. He nodded, lying. Just couldn't sleep. But his mind wasn't on quarterly reports. It was stuck in that church basement. Maeve's hands, the steam of the soup, the laughter of the people he'd displaced. Every detail played on repeat, taunting him. Why hadn't she told him? Why hadn't he noticed? What kind of man builds castles out of other people's homes? Hold on, because this is where things get interesting. At 5 o'clock that evening, he did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He left work early. He drove south again, past the edge of the city, through the neighborhoods his company had redeveloped into high-end estates. The closer he got to Valley Road, the smaller everything looked. Houses, lights, people. The church appeared again, stone walls half buried in snow, its cross leaning slightly, like it was tired of holding up the sky. Grayson parked across the street, heart thudding. He told himself he just wanted to understand. But deep down, he knew he was chasing guilt. Maeve's Subaru wasn't there yet. So he waited. 7:02 p.m. Headlights. She pulled in, same rhythm as before, same quiet purpose. He watched her carry in new boxes, steam already rising from the church vents. He stepped out of his car and crossed the street. Snow crunched beneath his boots. For a man who'd once negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking, he'd never felt more nervous. He opened the door slowly. The smell hit first. Stew, bread, something earthy and warm. Laughter followed. The room was fuller than before. Maybe 30 people now, coats hung over chairs, boots dripping near the heater. Maeve stood behind the counter again, ladling soup. A man in his 50s, tall, rough-bearded, was helping her set out bowls. Grayson recognized him. Jonas Reddick, one of his former foremen. Fired 2 years ago when his crew protested wage cuts. Grayson had barely remembered his face until now. But here Jonas was, smiling like he'd found a better job, one that didn't pay in money, but meaning. Grayson stepped inside. Heads turned. Conversations froze. Maeve looked up. Her ladle stopped midair. "Mr. Lyle," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. He swallowed. "Evening, Maeve." Nobody spoke. The sound of the furnace filled the silence. Then Jonas crossed his arms. "Well, look who decided to visit the peasants." Maeve shot him a look. "Jonas." "No, it's fine," Grayson said. "He's not wrong." He took a step closer. I saw you here last night." Maeve sighed. "I figured you did. Why didn't you tell me? Would it have mattered?" Her tone was calm, but her eyes were sharp. "You wouldn't have understood." He wanted to argue, but she was right. He hadn't understood anything about her life in 2 decades. "Maeve," he said quietly, "you've worked for me 24 years. If you needed help, you could've." "I don't need help, Mr. Lyle," she interrupted. "They do." She nodded toward the tables. "And they don't need charity. They need dignity." Now pause for a second, because that sentence? It hit him harder than any market crash. He looked around. A woman fed soup to her toddler with hands that shook from the cold. 2 teenage boys whispered jokes over stale rolls. Jonas handed out blankets from a box labeled donations. Callahan home. His Callahan home. She'd turned her house into a supply depot. Grayson's voice broke. "You've been paying for this yourself?" Maeve nodded. "Me and whoever can spare a little. The church lets us use the basement. We call it Valley Haven. Fitting, isn't it? Why didn't you ask me?" She met his eyes. "Because this isn't about you." The words cut clean, but not cruelly. Just truth, plain as the snow outside. Jonas laughed under his breath. "First time he's seen what he built, huh?" Grayson turned to him. "What do you mean?" Jonas stepped forward, wiping his hands on a rag. "You bought the Bridger Ranch, remember? Promised jobs, new housing. Said we'd be part of it. Then the taxes went up, the rent followed, and next thing you know, half this town was gone. You built luxury lodges for out-of-staters who fly in for elk season. Meanwhile, we're here, scraping by." Maeve touched Jonas's arm. "Enough." "No," Grayson said. "Let him finish." Jonas nodded slowly. "We lost everything, Mr. Lyle. But Maeve, she didn't. She stuck around. Started cooking here every Thursday. Never asked for credit, never took a dime. Just showed up." Grayson felt his throat tighten. The man he'd fired was defending the woman he'd ignored. There was something biblical about it. Maeve broke the silence. "Mr. Lyle, why are you here?" He hesitated. "Because I needed to see it again. To understand." "Understand what?" she asked. "How I missed it all," he said. "You've been in my house every day for half my life, and I never knew who you were." Maeve looked down, ladle trembling slightly. "That's because you never asked." There it was, the truth he'd been avoiding since the snow started falling. The room buzzed again as people returned to their food, pretending not to eavesdrop. But every word had landed. Grayson could feel the weight of it pressing down. He took a deep breath. "Can I help?" Maeve blinked. "Here." He nodded. "If you'll let me." Jonas scoffed. "You sure you can handle a ladle, boss?" "Guess we'll find out," Grayson said. And for the next hour, the man who owned half of Montana served soup in a church basement. He spilled some. Burned his hand. Got laughed at by a kid named Caleb, Maeve's grandson, he later learned. But he stayed. When the last bowl was scraped clean, the room emptied. Maeve wiped down the counters while Grayson dried trays beside her. "You don't have to come back," she said quietly. "I want to." She looked at him then, not with gratitude, not yet, but with curiosity. "Then don't just serve soup. Start seeing people." He nodded. "Teach me how." Maeve smiled faintly. "We'll see." He helped her carry boxes to her car. Snowflakes drifted under the streetlights. Before she drove off, she turned to him. "Mr. Lyle," she said, "you can't fix what's broken by writing a check." He nodded again, unsure what else to say. She drove away, taillights fading into the white. Grayson stood there long after she was gone, the smell of soup still clinging to his coat. Remember Valley Road? It would come back in a big way, because the next time Grayson Lyle walked through those doors, it wouldn't be as a bystander. It would be as a man desperate to make things right. And what he'd discover next would hurt more than any betrayal he'd ever imagined. The next week, Bridger Ridge was silent except for the wind howling through frozen pines. Grayson Lyle hadn't left the estate in 3 days. Not for work, not for meetings, not even to check his latest investment project, because every time he opened his laptop, all he saw was that church basement. Maeve ladling soup. Jonas laughing with tired eyes. Children eating bread that came from his own kitchen, not because of generosity, but because of guilt disguised as leftovers. He couldn't unsee it. Every creak of the mansion sounded like a ghost of someone he'd displaced. Every reflection in the glass looked like a man who'd traded people for profit. Now pause for a second, because this is where his story turns from discomfort to conviction. On Tuesday morning, he drove into town, unannounced, no chauffeur, no schedule. He parked in front of the old public library, the one his company had planned to demolish for a luxury condo project called Bridger Heights Residences. He'd approved it with a single click last year. He walked through the neighborhood. The streets felt smaller now. Rusted pickup trucks, kids playing with snowballs, old men fixing fences. People he used to call outdated in meetings. Outdated, he thought bitterly. I called living human beings outdated. His phone buzzed. Melinda again. Mr. Lyle, the investors are waiting on your statement about the expansion. Cancel it, he said. Sir. Cancel everything for now. He hung up. For once, silence felt like peace. But the peace didn't last long. Because that evening, when he came home, Maeve wasn't there. No note. No call. Just absence. Her small kitchen radio was missing too, the one that always played old gospel songs when she cleaned. Grayson tried calling. Straight to voicemail. Panic rose. Sharp and cold. He called Jonas, whose number he'd saved after that night in the church. She's sick, Jonas said. Didn't want to bother you. Sick. How bad? Bad enough that she still showed up at Valley Haven last night anyway. That was Maeve, serving through fever and pain, giving what she didn't have. Grayson's chest tightened. Where does she live? Jonas hesitated. Mr. Lyle, maybe you should just. Where? A pause. Then an address. Grayson drove through the blizzard like a man chasing forgiveness. Maeve's house sat at the end of a gravel road, small and half buried in snow. A flickering porch light struggled against the wind. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Finally, a weak voice. Doors open. Inside, the heat barely worked. The walls were lined with photos, ranch landscapes, soldiers, a young man in uniform. Maeve sat on a worn couch wrapped in 2 blankets. Mr. Lyle, she said, forcing a smile. Didn't expect company. You should have called. I didn't want you to worry. He looked around. The cupboards were nearly empty. The fridge hummed low, half filled with ingredients, vegetables, canned goods, all for the shelter. You give it all away, he whispered. Even now. Maeve shrugged. Others need it more. He sat beside her. Why, Maeve? Why keep doing this? She turned toward the wall, eyes falling on the photo of the young soldier. That's my son, she said softly. Caleb. You met his boy at the church. He was my heart. Grayson nodded. He's gone. She nodded. Army medic. Came home from Afghanistan. Couldn't find work. The ranch he grew up on was sold to one of your companies. We lost the land, and he lost himself. Took his own life 3 winters ago. The words hit Grayson like a hammer to the ribs. He remembered the file. Callahan Ranch Acquisition, 2019. Market value, $4.6 million. Finalized without discussion. He whispered, I didn't know. You didn't ask, she said gently. Silence. The kind that fills a room and never leaves. I blamed myself, Maeve continued. But then I realized, blame doesn't feed anyone. So I started cooking again. Thought maybe if I gave others what I couldn't give him, a reason to keep going, it would count for something. He stared at the floor. Maeve, I'm so sorry. I don't need sorry, she said. I need you to see what this town became. He nodded, tears stinging. Hold on, because this next part changed him forever. He drove home that night but didn't go inside. Instead, he sat in his car and opened his laptop. For the first time, he didn't look at profit margins. He looked at people, names buried in the displacement logs his company kept. 417 families. Each line item a story. Each unit sold, a home erased. He read until sunrise. By 6 a.m., he knew what he had to do. He called his CFO. Start compiling every family we bought out in the last 10 years. I want contact information, current addresses, anything we can find. Why? The CFO asked. Because we're giving something back. Sir, that's. Do it, Grayson said, his voice cold as the snow outside. He drove straight to Maeve's house again, this time with groceries, medicine, and an apology he couldn't fit in words. She looked stronger already but exhausted. I'm not taking your charity, she said when he set the bags down. It's not charity, he said. It's overdue rent. Maeve smiled weakly. You're learning. They talked for hours. About her son, her faith, her regrets. About his emptiness, his empire, his guilt. Somewhere between confessions, something shifted. He stopped speaking like a billionaire and started listening like a man. Later that evening, as he was leaving, Maeve called after him. You know, Mr. Lyle, guilt fades. But doing right, that sticks. He nodded. Then I'll make it stick. He didn't know how yet, but he would. That night, back in his mansion, he opened the window to the bitter air. For the first time in decades, he let the cold in. It burned, but it felt like truth. He whispered to himself, you can't fix what you don't face. And for the first time, he was ready to face everything. Because soon, his empire, the one built on glass and silence, would shatter. And when it did, he'd finally see who he really was. If this story hit you somewhere deep, if you've ever walked past someone like Maeve, thinking they were just doing their job, then maybe it's time we start seeing again. Maybe that's why you're here. So before you scroll away, before life pulls you back into noise, subscribe to this channel. Not for algorithms. For the reminder that stories like this still matter, that goodness still exists in quiet places. Because the next part of this story, the moment Grayson risks everything to rebuild what he broke, will change how you see wealth, power, and mercy forever. Stay. Watch. Be part of it. When dawn broke over the Bridger Range that Friday, Grayson Lyle wasn't the same man who'd stared at profit charts for comfort. He was a man haunted by names. He'd spent the night combing through old files, addresses, deeds, eviction notices, settlement letters. For every transaction his company celebrated, a family vanished. For every tower he raised, a home crumbled. By sunrise, he'd read over 100 of them. Calvin Rhodes, 72 years old. Ranch sold for development. Now living in a trailer park outside Livingston. The Ochoa family, 4 kids. Lost their house after taxes tripled. Moved 3 counties away. Maeve Callahan. Employee since 1999. Property seized under Lyle Development subdivision expansion. He stopped there, hands trembling. Her name. Her pain. His signature at the bottom of the document. The snow outside glittered like shards of glass. He called Melinda, his assistant. Clear my calendar for the next 2 weeks, he said. Sir, you've got. I said clear it. The next thing he did shocked her even more. And find Jonas Reddick. I need to meet him. That afternoon, Grayson drove into town again, this time without secrecy. The roads were rough, the sky gray. He parked in front of the church. Jonas was there, stacking donated canned goods into crates. He didn't look surprised to see him. Back so soon? Jonas asked, not unkindly. Grayson nodded. I need your help. Jonas raised an eyebrow. That's a first. I mean it. Maeve was right. I've been blind. I want to fix what I broke, but I don't know how. Jonas leaned against the table. You think a few handouts will undo years of damage? No, Grayson said, voice low. But maybe a lifetime of work can start to. Jonas studied him for a long time. You really mean that? I do. Jonas sighed. All right then. Start by listening. For the next few hours, Jonas talked, and Grayson listened. He learned how his developments pushed ranchers out, how corporate zoning erased communities, how taxes crushed people already barely hanging on. Grayson took notes like a student. For every problem, he wrote a question. How do we fix this? When the conversation ended, Jonas wiped his hands. You want to make things right? Don't just feed people for a night. Give them back a piece of their lives. Then help me do it, Grayson said. I'll fund it. You lead it. Jonas laughed. A billionaire taking orders from a man who fixes fences? Now I've seen everything. Maybe that's what it takes, Grayson replied. Something in his tone made Jonas pause. All right, he said finally. But if we do this, it's not about image. It's about people. Agreed. That evening, Grayson went back to Maeve's. She was sitting by the window, wrapped in a quilt, a cup of tea in hand. She looked tired but stronger. He told her everything, his decision to rebuild, to redirect company profits toward community housing, to bring Jonas on as a partner. Maeve listened quietly, eyes steady. You can't undo the past, Grayson, she said. It was the first time she'd used his first name. But you can change what the future costs. He nodded. That's what I want to do. She smiled faintly. Then start small. Start with the people you forgot. He looked out the window. Snow was falling again, softer this time. I'll start tomorrow. And he did. Over the next week, he visited families who'd lost their homes because of him. He went to trailers, motels, shelters. Sometimes people slammed the door. Sometimes they yelled. Sometimes they cried. But one by one, he listened. A woman named Dolores showed him eviction letters she'd kept as proof that rich men didn't care. A teenage boy told him he hadn't seen his best friend since their ranch was sold. An old veteran shook his hand and said, You can't buy redemption, son. But you can earn it. Every story cut deeper than the last. Every one made him more determined. He called his legal team. Suspend all current acquisitions, he said. No more projects until we rebuild what we've destroyed. Sir, that's financial suicide, his CFO protested. Then let it be resurrection, Grayson said. Now, pause for a second, because this is where things start to crack open. The media got wind of his redemption project. Investors panicked. The board called an emergency meeting. In that glass tower overlooking Bozeman, 8 executives stared at him like he'd lost his mind. You're dismantling everything you built, one said. I'm correcting what I built, Grayson replied. Do you realize what this means for shareholders? I realize what it means for the people we've displaced. The CFO leaned forward. We've thrived because you didn't let emotions interfere with business. Now you're burning millions over guilt. Grayson stood, his voice calm but sharp. Not guilt. Clarity. The room went silent. He laid out his plan: convert unoccupied ranch developments into affordable housing, establish a fund for displaced families, partner with local churches for community support, open new construction jobs exclusively to those affected. They called him naive. He called them blind. And when one director threatened to resign, he simply said, Then I'll buy your shares myself. When the meeting ended, he drove straight to the hospital. Maeve had been admitted again, dehydration this time. He found her sitting up, watching snow fall through the window. You look tired, she said. I am. Good. It means you're working for the right reasons. He laughed softly. I might lose everything. Maeve smiled. Maybe that's the point. Sometimes you have to lose what you built to see what matters. He sat beside her, taking her hand. You saved more lives than any hospital could, Maeve. And you're finally saving your own, she said gently. 3 days later, he gathered his crew, Jonas, a few displaced families, and volunteers from the church, and stood on an empty field outside Bozeman. It used to be farmland. Now it would become something new. He handed Jonas a blueprint. Community Ranch 1, it read. Affordable living. Shared land ownership. Local employment priority. Jonas whistled. You're serious. Grayson nodded. Completely. The crowd watched as the first shovel hit the frozen earth. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't glamorous. But it was honest. Snowflakes fell, mixing with the dirt. Maeve's grandson, Caleb Jr., clapped his small hands. Grayson smiled. This is where it starts. Maeve couldn't be there that day, doctor's orders. But when he called her from the site, she whispered something he'd never forget. Grayson, don't build to be remembered. Build so others don't have to be forgotten. He looked around at the crowd, at the land, at the horizon he'd once seen only as profit margins. And for the first time in his life, he saw Montana the way she did. Raw, human, alive. That night, he stood alone under the wide, cold sky. The wind howled through the valley, but it no longer sounded angry. It sounded like mercy. He whispered into the dark. For you, Maeve. For all of them. And with that, the rebuilding truly began. Winter came early that year. The mountains around Bozeman looked like white monuments to silence, but in the valley, something different was happening. Something alive. 3 months had passed since that first shovel hit frozen soil. Now, the hum of construction filled the air where stillness once ruled. Locals called it the second harvest, not of wheat or cattle, but of hope. The sign at the entrance read, "The Bridger Commons, built with people, not on top of them." Grayson Lyle still wore his old ranch coat, but it looked different on him now, less like armor, more like belonging. His boots were caked in mud. His hands carried calluses from real work. He no longer arrived in tinted SUVs or with reporters. He came early, quietly, and stayed late. Jonas walked up behind him, blueprints in hand. "We're ahead of schedule," he said. "Roofing's going up next week. Community gardens almost ready." Grayson smiled faintly. Maeve would have liked that. Jonas nodded. She still might. "Heard she's coming by soon, once the doctor clears her." "Good," Grayson said softly. "It won't feel right until she's here." That afternoon, Grayson visited the site's small chapel, a repurposed barn with a cross carved from old fencing wood. He sat in the back pew, listening to the wind whistle through the boards. He hadn't prayed in years, not really. But lately, words came to him in silence. "Thank you," he whispered, "for letting me start over." The door creaked open. It was Maria, one of the women who'd lost her home 2 winters ago. Her 3 children were now helping plant trees on the property. She smiled when she saw him. "We wanted to thank you," she said. "For what?" "For giving us a home again. My kids sleep through the night now. They don't ask when we'll have to leave." Grayson shook his head. "Don't thank me. Thank Maeve. She showed me what home really means." Maria's smile softened. "Then thank you for listening to her." 2 weeks later, the first families moved in. It wasn't luxury. It was better. Wooden porches, shared courtyards, a schoolhouse built from reclaimed timber. Every home had a small plaque near the door. Community, grace, belonging. The media came, of course. Cameras, microphones, sound bites. But for once, Grayson didn't stand in front of them. He stood among the people. When a journalist asked for a statement, he simply said, "We're just fixing what we forgot." That night, there was a bonfire in the center of the property. The sky glowed orange and gold. Children roasted marshmallows. Jonas played an old guitar. Laughter carried through the valley like wind chimes. And then, a hush. A car pulled up near the edge of the field. Maeve, wrapped in a long wool coat, her silver hair catching firelight, she stepped out slowly. The crowd turned. For a moment, no one moved. Then little Caleb ran to her and hugged her knees. Grayson walked toward her, heart heavy and light all at once. "You made it," he said, voice trembling. "I told you I would," she said, smiling. "Couldn't miss the grand opening of my favorite mistake." He laughed, tears breaking free. "It's not perfect yet. It's not supposed to be," she said. "Perfection's where grace goes to die. But this is living again." They stood side by side, watching the families, people once scattered now gathered, sharing food and stories and warmth. Maeve took a deep breath. "You know, for years I thought I'd failed. My son, our land, everything. But maybe the Lord doesn't waste pain. Maybe he just waits for us to use it right. Grayson nodded slowly. You did that, Maeve. You showed me how. She looked at him. No, Grayson. You chose to see. That's the miracle. He swallowed hard. You'll have to forgive me if I'm not done learning. Maeve smiled gently. That's the point of learning. It never ends. Later that night, after everyone went home, Grayson stood alone near the fire pit. The embers glowed faintly, sparks rising into the cold air. He thought of his towers, his offices, the skyline with his name carved in steel. All of it seemed small now, noise compared to this silence. He closed his eyes and remembered the first night he followed Maeve, her small frame against the snow, her hands carrying those heavy boxes. What he thought was theft had been love. What he'd built on greed was now being rebuilt on grace. He knelt in the dirt, whispering into the dark, "Thank you for breaking me open." Weeks passed. The project grew. More families applied. Investors, different ones this time, called, wanting to join. Not for profit, but for purpose. Jonas oversaw the next phase. Maria taught in the new community school. And Maeve, she finally took a rest. One morning, Grayson visited her home again. This time, she had color in her cheeks and warmth in her voice. On the table sat a single envelope addressed to him. "What's this?" he asked. "My resignation," she said with a smile. He blinked. "You're quitting." "Not quitting," she said. "Graduating. You don't need a maid anymore. You need a partner in faith." He nodded slowly, emotions tangling in his chest. "So what will you do?" he asked. She looked out the window at the mountains. "Keep cooking. Keep serving. But now I'll do it without hiding." He smiled. "And I'll keep building without forgetting." She patted his hand. "Then we'll be just fine." That night, the valley fell quiet again. Snow drifted lazily through the air, blanketing the new homes, muffling the sounds of laughter and life. Grayson stood on one of the porches, looking up at the stars. He thought of Maeve's words, "You can't fix what you don't face." He faced it. He fixed what he could. And somehow, in the process, the coldest winter of his life became the warmest one. He whispered, "Welcome home." If you take one thing from this story, let it be this. Grace isn't found in the grand things we build. It's found in the small, quiet acts no one sees. The meals shared. The hands held. The forgiveness given when we least deserve it. Maybe you've been like Grayson, so busy building that you forgot who you were building for. Or maybe you've been like Maeve, giving everything you have in a world that rarely notices. Either way, this story isn't fiction. It's a mirror. So before you click away, ask yourself, who have you stopped seeing? Who's been feeding others in silence while you weren't looking? And if that question lingers in your chest right now, don't ignore it. Because stories like this one, they're not just meant to be watched. They're meant to wake us up. If this story stirred something in you, if it made you remember a kindness you overlooked, a person you underappreciated, or a moment you wish you'd handled differently, then don't let it fade when the screen goes dark. Like and subscribe to this channel. Not for me. Not for numbers. But so that stories like this, about grace, about redemption, about seeing the unseen, keep finding you.